enforcement officer for the town of New Canaan. I've worked for the town for about 4 years now. I've been the town planner for 3 years. I'm from Ridgefield, Connecticut originally, live there again now with my fiance. I have a bachelor's in geography from Virginia Tech, and my first job was with the city of Derby in Connecticut as well, so I've gotten, both ends of the spectrum in Connecticut. So it's been a very interesting career so far. So I am talking to you today about, see everything? So we are doing a zoning regulation update, the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Planning Department. We started in 2025, it's going to go until about 2027 at this rate. So just to start, wanted to talk to you all about what zoning is, why we're doing it, why is it important, and then I'll get into the process for you all. So zoning, and this is a screenshot of the zoning map for downtown New Canaan. We have a lot of different zones. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But the purpose of zoning at the end of the day is for residents, property owners to have predictable development. So what can you do with your property? Are you in a single family zone? Are you in a commercial zone? What can you do with your commercial property? And at the end of the day, it's also for health and safety. We don't want industrial zones right next to residential zones. We want people to have safe places to live. There are places where high pollutant type uses should go. And then in addition to, orderly development, zoning regulations are also meant to change over time. So even though there is supposed to be a predictability element to it, zoning changes as society changes. And I'll give you guys a few examples about why zoning in New Canaan has changed over the years and why we want to see it to continue to change. So just a little bit of fun New Canaan history for you all. This is the first zoning map that the town of New Canaan ever had. It's from 1932. And just some fun highlights. I don't know if you all can see my cursor a little bit over here. So down in here, this is where Grove Street is. Pine Street doesn't exist at this point. But so, you have the train tracks, lumberyard lot. That was the original industrial zone in New Canaan, which some people may not have known that we had an industrial zone. And again, this is where it's good for zoning to change over time. In 1932, we had the industrial zone until about 1950, 1960.
And what was the industry at that time?
Well, so we had the lumberyard, I believe, at that time. But also, the demands of the 40s, for example, you had World War II going on. So, you wanted some industry, but you wanted to make sure that you didn't have too intense industry. But, there were things that were needed for the war effort. And, by the 50s and 60s, we didn't need that anymore. So, residents didn't want that in downtown New Canaan anymore. So it's just things like that where, over time the needs of society changes. So we want to grow with that. We want to change with that, for the viability of the town. So, we started in 1932, very long time ago. We have last comprehensively updated the zoning regulations between 2003 and 2007. It was a 4-year process. And your dear member David Rucci sat through every single one of those. So he's the historian. He is the historian for that. So if you have any questions about that process, ask him. And it's an industry standard to update the regulations after every comprehensive plan that you adopt. And so we adopted our plan of conservation and development in October of 2024. So we're now in the process of trying to change the regulations to make sure they match with our POCD that we adopted about 1.5 years ago. So what have we been up to so far? Like I just said, 2024 we adopted our POCD. It's a 10-year plan that goes over our development goals, our conservation goals through October of 2034. And so in early 2025, staff began to internally review the zoning regulations just to identify what sort of procedural issues we find with the regulations when we review permits and whatnot, and other large-scale issues that we may or may not have. the Planning and Zoning Commission then put together a subcommittee to help really guide the process, and in June of 2025, we hired our consultant, BFJ Planning. And then September of 2025, after summer was over, because we don't like to do anything too controversial over the summer, we began the rewrite process. We came up with this whole 12-month work plan of how we were going to comprehensively update all of the regulations in this 12-month time span. And then in November of 2025, the state decided to pass House Bill 8002, and I don't know if any of you have read about this in the news or anything like that. So that kind of changed everything for us, which I'll talk a little bit about. So we had this wonderful plan where we'll be able to review everything, no problem, but House Bill 8002 mandated some changes that every municipality has to incorporate into their zoning regulations by July 1, 2026. We were thinking we would have our full set done in October, November of 2026. So we really had to, change course a little bit because we needed to get certain things done by July 1. And that's what I'll really talk to you about, what we're doing in time for July 1 in my next few slides. So, the maroon-ish colored diamond is where we are right now in the process. So just a little bit before July 2026, we will have fully adopted new commercial zoning regulations, new parking regulations, and then inclusionary zoning regulations, which are affordable housing type regulations for for-profit developers. And then looking forward in August of 2026, we'll really start up again trying to go back to working on our single-family zones, institutional uses, that sort of thing. And then sometime in 2027, we will adopt our full set of regulations. So it took 4 years in the last comprehensive update. We're going to try to do it in 2 years this time, so we'll see. So when we, set out on this process, the Planning and Zoning Commission came up with 10 goals of, what to accomplish when updating these regulations. I've highlighted some in orange, and those are goals that we've been able to partially address through our new process where we're really dealing with the commercial-only zones. And then I have some green ones in the next slide where we were able to fully address these goals. So I'm not going to read through every single one for you, but overall it's just these regulations, some things are copy and pasted straight from the 1950s or something like that. So it's really about modernizing what we can. There's some inconsistencies, language that contradicts each other, and every year we get new court cases, new state laws that change what planning and zoning commissions can and cannot do, and unfortunately we haven't been able to keep up with all of that, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, so we're really trying to play a bit of catch up. And then I'll talk about number 4, so strengthen and change the current special permit criteria. So when you apply for a special permit to the Planning and Zoning Commission, that could be applying for a parking garage at a private school, or it could be applying to put a guest cottage in the back of your 4-acre lot. And the criteria for whether you should or shouldn't get a special permit are the same, whether it's that small of a project or that large of a project. And some of our special permit criteria, I went back, did all the research, there are 10 criteria, 4 of them are copy and pasted directly from our 1959 zoning regulations. So, they need some updating, because what you needed a special permit for in the 1950s, probably not what you need a special permit for in 2026. And also, why we grant a special permit for a guest cottage in your backyard versus a parking garage in a private school, probably should have different reasons for why we're approving these applications. So it's things like that. It's really to just protect the town, strengthen our processes, and make it clearer for residents. And then just, a few other goals. One of our goals was to fully, look at our business zone regulations, which we are doing. The House Bill 8002 changed a lot of things, but we were able to, fully achieve that goal in this round of the process. And, we'll continue after July 1 to address the rest of these regulations. So things like looking at residential setbacks, heights, and building coverage. That was all changed in the 2003 to 2007 update. So 20 years later, we want to look and make sure what they did in 2003 Are we pleased with what the outcomes of that are? Do we like how new single-family homes are developed? Is it too much? Is it too little? So that sort of thing. And now I will just get a little bit more into House Bill 8002. Please no booing, Scott, in the back, I know. 8002. So, as I've said multiple times, this bill really changed our whole process. So, we had to switch and focus now on downtown, which is the area shown on the map, as you can see on the screen. And so, we had to change certain things about all of our commercial zones, parking standards, like I said, inclusionary zoning, which is our affordable housing, and then we've also decided to change our downtown zoning map. And so I won't bore you with all the details, but I'll do some high-level explanations of everything that we're working on, and I did provide printouts. We have a nice summary packet that we put together of all of the changes we're making, so if you have any interest in digging into the language of what we're changing, please come find me after this. I'm happy to give you a copy of our packet. So first and foremost with this House Bill 8002, in our downtown zones, we have to change a few things pertaining to housing. So we have to allow middle housing everywhere in our commercial zones. So middle housing is anything that's between 2 and 9 units. So 2-family home, 3-family home, could be 4 rows of townhouses, and again, it could be up to a 9-unit apartment building. And what's frustrating on the planning side of this is that we can't require a retail component. So in theory, you could have a building on Elm Street converted into housing only and not have a retail component. So we have crafted the regulations as best we could to try to disincentivize that, because we want retail, on Elm Street, on Forest Street, but that is something that we unfortunately had to allow. But some good news is, if right next to the thrift store, which is in our retail zone, there's actually a house right next to the thrift store, and that's a 2-family home. So we do have things like that already in our downtown. So it won't bring about shocking changes, but it is, something to keep in mind. And we also have to allow mixed use everywhere in our downtown, which we did already allow. So mixed use is when you have retail and residential, or commercial and residential in the same building. We did already allow that, which is great, but we used to require public hearings for those type of applications. So if residents had concerns, you could speak those concerns at a planning and zoning commission meeting. We can no longer do that. It now just has to be what we call as-of-right development, where if it meets our regulations with building height, density, setbacks, that sort of thing, the planning and zoning commission has to approve it. So House Bill 8002 also made significant changes to, and if anyone can't hear, just let me know the stuff going on in the back. So with parking, the new House Bill stipulated that planning and zoning commissions cannot require parking for any housing development that is less than 16 units, unless you adopt what they call traffic mitigation zones. So, and there were stipulations about how large or how small the mitigation zones could be. So we were able to put together a zone that covers all of downtown New Canaan and all of the B residence zone, which is the area in purple, because we allow 2 families in that zone. So, there's a lot of concern, and there's some chatter that, planning and zoning can't require parking anymore for multifamily development. That's not true, and thankfully we've been able to craft a zone where, even though the state was trying to take away our right to require parking in smaller housing developments, we've been able to put this zone together to where that isn't an issue for New Canaan.
Sarah, is there any significance, all those different colors?
Yes, so.
Is that just gonna take too much time for you to?
So I can just quickly explain. So we have, this is a screenshot of our zoning map, and the hatched area in blue is the traffic mitigation zone. So we have a bunch of different residential zones. So the purple And basically everything else that's in the blue hashed area are zones where we allow multifamily development. So the goal was to just make sure that anywhere where multifamily housing was allowed, we could still require parking. So then, everything else, the green, the tan colors, that's all single family zoning. It's just different lot sizes. So the tan is the half acre zone, or no, the tan is the 1 acre zone, the yellow next to it is the half acre zone, that sort of thing.
So, I mean, what was the parking mitigation plan, what was done?
So the traffic mitigation zone is the blue hashed area.
What did you do to make it a traffic mitigation zone? What was?
So that is language from the bill that we have to call it a traffic mitigation zone. Yeah. So now switching gears to not have to talk about this housing bill anymore. We're going to talk about some changes that the Planning and Zoning Commission actually wanted to make that weren't, driven by the state. So we took a look at our zoning map. So on the, I think that's your left, with the 6 zones, 6 different colors. Those are this is our current zoning map. Next to that is the proposed commercial zoning map. So as you'll see, we're going down from 6 zones down to 2 zones. And this is actually very similar to the zoning map back in the 70s and 80s. And so basically, in the 80s, they came up with making this purple zone, you've got this gray zone, and then the green over here. And they did that to promote, big box store, high intensity uses on the edges of downtown. And then the gray zones were for your big office buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s. And so as zoning is changing, the purposes of those zones in practice aren't really accomplishing much. And so, after some analysis and what the market is demanding, it made more sense, given how small of an area it is, to just have one business zone, and then we're combining the 2 retail zones. So Forest Street and Elm Street all have the same zoning now. And this is really just for procedural, ease, I'll say, and just to make it easier for residents and developers to understand what's allowed and to, have a more cohesive development style, just given how small of an area, our downtown is. The commission also, wanted to address some procedural issues, as did staff. So a few issues that we identified. One, for businesses just trying to open up in existing spaces in downtown, there's a lot of procedural red tape. So I have a screenshot of where Lily Pulitzer used to be on Elm Street. That just became Corburn Pilates. It's a permitted use going to a permitted use. They had to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission to get approval to change their use. Even though, everything was permitted, there was no issue. And, when I have to, as a staff person, go tell a new business owner, hey, you gotta go to the Planning and Zoning Commission to, get your approval, there's always this panic of, I have to go before a board, I don't know what to do, I'm a Pilates instructor, or what? And so, there's really there's no purpose. I've heard from commissioners, it's a waste of commission time. So, we were able to change the regulations, so now that's something staff can just sign off on. I review to make sure the business complies with our regulations, they get their green stamp of approval, and then they get to move on. This is supposed to be easier for businesses. We want a strong downtown where we're not creating unnecessary barriers for businesses. Another issue we identified on commercial parking is that our regulations were actually on private property outdated for industry standards. And so that's an aerial image of the Walgreens shopping center. They have 120 parking spaces on that lot. Wow. It goes all the way, wraps around the back, and that was required by planning and zoning. That was the minimum number of parking spaces they needed for that development. Has anyone seen that parking lot at full? Ever?
Yes.
So, it's probably the only time. And so, that's, you know, it's not great planning. It's not good for the environment to have that much asphalt for no reason. And so it's just situations like that where, you know, we're making development more expensive, and then, you know, we just have these empty parking lots which don't lead to an attractive downtown. So we're decreasing our parking requirements for commercial uses consistent with industry and national standards because we were requiring too much. And then, you know, we got to have some fun, you know, policy discussions that were broader, like what happens to our large office buildings that, you know, some are vacant, some are not. And, you know, we're using this as the example. So I don't know if anyone doesn't know what this is, but this is the Locust Ave, you know, 2 red brick office buildings where they've just received an approval to convert it to a hotel. And this is their rendering of what they plan to do. They received approval to do this. I don't have timing on when this is actually going to happen, but in theory, this will eventually be the corner of Locust and Cherry Street. And so we got to have, you know, fun discussions about, okay, we have like 4 or 5 other office buildings like this. What do we want to see in the future? Do we want our regulations to incentivize more of this? Or do we want to see them torn down over time? Or should we let the market decide? And so, you know, we got to think about how do we change our regulations to either promote more of this or to promote, you know, the tear down of these buildings. And so we tried to leave it as broad as possible. So, you know, architects could do their thing and, you know, design as they see fit. So yeah. And then just to wrap up where we go from here, after July 1, when everything's adopted, we need to start looking again at our residential zones. We need to look at our institutional uses. How do we manage changes to schools, to, you know, Silver Hill, those types of uses? How do we promote more historic preservation? And then we need to look more at our special zones. We've got the Waveney zone, our open space zone, we have an apartment zone, the zones where we have the, you know, town managed affordable housing. And so just some important dates. June 2nd at 7 o'clock, we're having a public hearing on our commercial zoning changes. So if you feel passionate about anything I've just told you, feel free to show up and speak your mind. We always appreciate that. On June 23rd, the Planning and Zoning Commission is hoping to adopt these new regulations to meet that July 1 deadline. You know, July, August, September, maybe even October, we're gonna draft more changes to the regulations. Fall 2026 to winter of 2027, we hope to have more public engagement where we will, you know, talk about draft changes we've made. And then spring and summer 2027, hopefully we can do our public hearings, final edits, and then, you know, sometime later in 2027, we hope to be done with this process and have the rest of our regulations updated. And if you have any interest in reading our regulations, because you just find zoning so interesting, you can go on the Town of New Canaan's website, newcanaan.info, navigate to our planning and zoning page, and then there's a link on the left side that says Zoning Regs Update 2025, and all of that fun information is there. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Great presentation, first of all. I'm especially interested in where the public input comes into the process.
Yeah.
And you listed in your timeline a number of hearings and public engagement. What about at the very front end? A lot of times, say in the corporate world, if somebody's thinking of making changes, they'll do surveys or market research to identify what changes the market is looking for. What do you do in terms of getting that kind of data at the beginning of the process?
Yeah, so that's where, you know, I was saying at the beginning, it's an industry standard really to adopt your new regulations after you do your comprehensive plan. So that process is very intense public engagement. So 2023 and 2024, we did public surveys, we did public workshops to get, you know, that's more of a broad discussion of what the town wants and doesn't want. So we use that at the beginning of the process to start on our policy.
Yeah. I don't know, thanks Sarah for your great presentation. There's been a lot of energy around the Beacon Street development and Arnold Carter. I just read this rather strange article in the New Canaanite. It talks about how 6 neighbors approve of whatever it is, and then 3 neighbors don't, and so the plan is changing from like 100 units to 60 units or something like that. Is that in your purview?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that is confidential still a little bit because it's private settlement agreements, but, you know, what I can say is that, the Weed Street developer, Arnold Carter, he does have court approval to build an 102 unit, development. And there are 11, I believe, interveners on the case, and they, if Arnold and the town and the 11 interveners could come to some sort of agreement where all 13 parties agree, they could move forward with an alternative development, but you need all 13 parties to agree. And so Arnold's letter outlined broadly what a potential agreement is, and
See, it's curious to me that somehow our policy or processes allow for a few citizens to make the difference in that huge difference
Yeah.
of whether 100 units versus 60 units. I don't understand how that works, because I would think that would be somebody in the town, elected officials making those decisions.
the courts made their decision, and the final, step before it's all over is get a private settlement, come to pass, and, yeah.
Thank you, sorry.
Sarah, back to the commercial zoning map, that
Yeah.
the regulations will need to get changed by July 1st per the Connecticut state law.
Yes.
I know we can see the map and, that's a great visual, but can you identify, are there any things that the state is telling New Canaan that you must allow in your commercial district that was not previously allowed, that the state is saying all towns have to do this?
Yeah, so middle housing is the main one that we didn't have before, so again, anything between 2 and 9 units.
So that's-
The example I mentioned, that was built in like 1890, so that's been there forever, but we typically require a commercial component with all housing, but this is.
So that's the biggest change, is that
So
Correct.
anywhere in the purple?
Purple or yellow.
Or yellow.
Yeah,
So middle housing must be allowed anywhere in the purple or yellow?
yes,
If that's what the owner chooses to do.
yes.
Yeah, can you talk about, is the committee looking at historical property designation? And can you also talk about the intersection of being historically designated and how applicable some of the state laws are on these new impositions?
Yeah, so I would say the state law really doesn't take into account any historic, properties or anything like that, which is disappointing. As far as historic designation goes, there's been a lot of discussion behind the scenes about that, and the strongest tool that a municipality has for protecting properties is having a historic district. Other than that, there's really no zoning regulation that could prevent demolition of historic structures or something like that. And I think there's definitely appetite from the Planning and Zoning Commission to have some sort of expanded historic district. The problem with those is that the property owners at the end of the day are who, get to vote on whether a historic district is established or not. And in a commercial zone, that may be difficult or impossible because, would the property values go down potentially, because you can't change it. So there are tools that, you can have, like incentivizing the preservation of historic structures by giving people more, like height, for example. So on 112 Main Street, which is the Raymond building, it's got the, grates over the windows. The Planning and Zoning Commission approved about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, a development that didn't end up going through, but we were going to permit them getting an extra story on top to, help facilitate, offset the costs of redoing that building. So we do already have provisions. We'll definitely, in this next round of edits, look to see what else we can do to help with historic preservation. But it's definitely a tough topic, and it's something I don't think we've solved fully anywhere.
Is there anybody pushing that in town? It seems like 4 or 5 years ago there was a push for that. When the big developer in Harlem came in and, put all the applications in. I thought we were gonna try and expand the historic building.
So there was, and I don't have the full history of that, but I believe the historic district was expanded on the national register, but a vote either failed or it didn't go through to expand it at the local level. And so, you know, those safeguards against demolition only apply if it's a local historic district. So, you know, I think it was it expanded onto Seminary Street and St. John's Place. So those protections unfortunately still aren't there. I think it's the same people still pushing for those sorts of historic preservation things. And you know, it's something that the commission I think is still going to look into, but it's more than just planning and zoning to get that done.
Yeah, I think they lost that vote
Yeah.
with the homeowners.
They
on
did.
that.
Well, that's, speaking as somewhat of a party to that vote, the problem is communication. As with everything, it starts with a grassroots effort to explain why something would benefit the town and the community in the long run. And instead it was like a midnight notice that came out with the property owners that were actually subjected to that change were not involved in the process of what you're applying for. Other third parties applied to make their properties a historic district without explaining to them why this was a good thing. So that's why it failed. It wasn't that it was a good effort, it just was ill-conceived as far as how it went down.
So
I mean,
you said at the beginning that there was like World War II as a driver for policy.
Yeah.
What would you say are the main drivers for the plan of conservancy and development today?
Yeah, so you know, through that whole process, we identified 4 goals as a community through our. We did a survey in 2023. We got like 2,000 responses, which was really exciting. And you know, the 4 policy goals. You're quizzing me now. Let's make sure I remember them. But so it was it was preserve and maintain the vitality of downtown and what makes it special. Come up. The second one was to really facilitate thoughtful housing development in and around town. The state is pushing it down our throats a little bit, so if we have to do it, let's make it as New Canaan as we can, I'll say. And then, preserve the environment. That was another theme, just, what can we do to expand access to open space in New Canaan,
That's the
that sort of thing.
conservancy, yeah.
And then, the final one was just, to continue to support the excellence of our public facilities.
I think it was Mark Twain that said that no citizen is safe so long as the legislature is in session. What are some of the most dramatic things that are being considered in Hartford now?
So right now, so the good news is we'll be safe on May 6th, that's when the session ends. The biggest, and I haven't received an update in a while, and I'm very hopeful this will not go through because this would have insane implications for the whole state of Connecticut. But there's a law on the table to promote more starter home creation, that anywhere you have public water and sewer, minimum lot sizes would go down to 5,000 square feet anywhere in the sewer district.
Wow.
So 5,000 square feet, you could get almost 8 parcels out of a 1 acre lot, basically. We don't have any zoning in New Canaan that is that small. So our B-Res zone, which is on, like the houses on Forest Street, or trying to think where else, like on Church Street, that's our B-Res zone. That's 7,500 square feet for minimum lot area. So it would be even smaller and more dense than those zones, or like Summer Street, Millport Avenue, that sort of things. It would be denser than that by a little bit. So that was put on the table, and again, that would have crazy implications for the whole state of Connecticut, so hopefully that does not get passed, because we'll be changing our process all over again. if that happens.
What's the biggest risk with the draft regulations if they went into effect the way they are today, if they went into effect that way? It seems to me that the introduction of floor area ratio into the regulations is sort of a new concept that we've never had in New Canaan before, and we've been debating a 0.6 FAR versus a 1.0 FAR. So that would be my answer as the biggest change to the regulations in the downtown. What's your answer for what's the biggest change that we're going to see?
So we've actually had a FAR in the downtown we've had it at least since 2003, so that thankfully is not new. I mean, I think the middle housing in downtown is the largest change. We're really just trying to, I think, update processes, fix issues that haven't been an issue yet, but fix them before they become issues. So I would just say middle housing, yeah.
Thank you.